What if the miracles you've witnessed in your church were not from God, but from a much darker place? What if the one person you trusted with your deepest fears, your most desperate prayers, was hiding something sinister beneath his kind words and soothing touch? The man who claims to speak on behalf of the Almighty, the one who heals the sick, raises the broken, and comforts the weary. What if he isn't who he says he is? In Port Harcourt, a city known for its bustling streets and vibrant life, there was a church that everyone knew. It wasn't just any church. This was the church where miracles happened, where the power of God seemed to pour out with every sermon, every prayer, every healing. And at the center of it all stood one man, Prophet Chijioke. The crowds gathered every Sunday, filling the church with people desperate for a miracle. Their eyes were full of hope as they watched the prophet step onto the pulpit, his face glowing with divine authority. His words were like magic. Chijioke spoke of healing, of divine intervention, of prophecies that came true time after time. People wept with joy, convinced that the Almighty had blessed them with a true man of faith. Visuals of the church, packed with people, flash across the screen. We see children, elders, young mothers, all looking up to the prophet with eyes full of faith and desperation. The prophet's hands raised, his voice powerful, the air thick with reverence. Each week, as the congregation listened to his sermons, there was always something miraculous happening. People were healed, addictions broken, and curses lifted. The prophet's fame spread like wildfire. His name was whispered in every corner of the city, his reputation reaching far and wide. But what they didn't know, the people who watched him heal, the ones who wept with joy after every sermon, the ones who saw him as a divine messenger of God, was that his power came at a terrifying cost. He was not the man they believed him to be. He was not chosen by God. What they didn't know is that beneath the warm smile, behind those promises of healing, there was something darker, something far more sinister. And it was about to be exposed. Port Harcourt, a city of incredible wealth, modern energy, and untold secrets. On the surface, it's a vibrant, bustling city of industry and hope. The streets are alive with the hum of traffic, the chatter of markets, and the ever-present oil that fuels both the city's prosperity and its hidden darkness. But as with every city, Port Harcourt has its shadows. Beneath the sleek high-rises and the crowded streets, there's a world that thrives in the quiet corners away from prying eyes. A world where secrets are kept, deals are made, and power is not always pure. It's in this city that a prophetic church began to thrive. Known to everyone and frequented by the faithful, the church was a sanctuary for many who came seeking healing, guidance, and hope. The prophet Chijioke was at the heart of it all. The church became a beacon for people from all walks of life. Crowds gathered every week, filling the pews with those desperate for a miracle, a sign, a way out of their pain. They came for healing, for prophecy, for a glimpse of hope in a world full of suffering. And every week they received it. The church's dynamic was one of unwavering faith. From the young children to the elderly, every member believed that Chijioke's miracles were a gift from God. The healing services were nothing short of spectacular. The prophet raised the sick, calmed the anxious, and spoke words of prophecy that left the people in awe. He spoke with undeniable authority, and his words seemed to carry weight beyond that of any mortal man. He was the man who raised the sick, healed the broken, and spoke the word of God with undeniable authority. His presence commanded attention. He could heal with a simple touch and foretell the future with the sharpness of a blade. Each week, people flocked to the church, hoping to catch a glimpse of the divine through his words. His charisma was magnetic. There was no question in the hearts of his followers. He was God's servant, chosen to lead them, to heal them, to guide them to the divine truth. They trusted him, implicitly, but as the church booms and the prophet's influence grows, One person begins to see cracks in the facade. Ngozi, a young woman, a devout churchgoer, has followed Chijioke for years, but something deep inside her has started to stir. She has always believed in the power of faith, and she knows that her place is within this church. She has witnessed miracles. She's seen them with her own eyes. But the more she watches, the more she begins to feel that something is not quite right. She notices the mysterious disappearances of the prophet after every service. She begins to hear whispers in the halls, members who have been healed, yet they don't seem the same. They seem distant, almost lost. Ngozi's gaze often drifts to those who have been healed. While they walk away seemingly cured, something about them feels off. Their eyes don't shine with the same hope. Their spirits seem hollow, as if they were touched by something other than grace. The more she watches, the more she feels a knot tighten in her stomach. As she looks around, she sees the faces of those who have been healed. Yes, their bodies seem restored, but their spirits feel empty. Her heart weighs heavy, and for the first time, she begins to doubt. Is this true? Or is there something more to these miracles than what the prophet wants us to see? The congregation's faith is unwavering, and their devotion to Prophet Chijioke is absolute. They trust in his divine power, believing that every miracle is a gift from above. But for Ngozi, the more she witnesses, the more she begins to sense that beneath the surface, there is something much darker at play. The more Ngozi observed, the more the unease in her heart grew. There was a feeling she couldn't shake, a gnawing suspicion that lingered at the edges of her faith. At first, it was subtle. Small things that didn't add up. The long nights when the church was empty, when Prophet Chijioke had vanished, alone in the silence. Where did he go? After every service, while the congregation continued in their joyful praises, Chijioke would slip away. The charismatic leader, the man who held the power to heal and perform miracles, would disappear without a trace, vanishing into the night like a shadow. Ngozi started to notice more. People who had been healed, people she knew, acted strangely afterward. The physical healings were undeniable, but there was something missing. Their eyes were dull, their smiles lacked warmth. The hope that had once radiated from them seemed to fade after each healing. The prophet's miracles had a cost, and it was showing in their weary, lifeless eyes. Ngozi's nights grew restless. She would lie in bed, eyes wide open, as strange images filled her dreams. Dark symbols, rituals, ancient shrines, and whispers of dark voices, all of it haunted her. One night, the dream was different. She saw Chijioke, but he was no longer standing on the pulpit in front of his congregation. He was deep in the forest, surrounded by strange figures. The air was thick with incense, and a dark altar stood before him. She could see him sacrificing something, offering it to the shadows that loomed around him. She woke in a cold sweat, her heart racing. Was it just a dream? But the images lingered. The shrine, the symbols, the sense that something ancient, something dangerous, was lurking beneath the surface of this church. Chijioke was hiding something, and Ngozi knew she had to uncover it. One evening, as she walked through the church's side entrance, Ngozi overheard a conversation with a man who had once served as a healer at the church, an old man who no longer attended. His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his words. "The prophet wasn't always like this," the man said, speaking to a close friend. "He was a man of faith, yes, but something changed. He made a deal, a dangerous one." The words echoed in her mind. A dangerous deal. She stepped closer, hiding in the shadows. She couldn't make out every word, but she heard enough. The old man spoke of sacrifices, how the prophet's healing power was not a gift from God, but something that came with a price. The prophet had struck a pact, one that required him to give something in exchange for his power. And that something, what was it? What kind of sacrifices? Ngozi asked herself, her heart sinking as she pieced the fragments of the conversation together. The old healer's voice had been filled with dread, as if speaking of something he regretted. He warned that the power came from a dark source, and the price was always a soul. Ngozi couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside her, a feeling of dread, an urgency to discover the truth. That night, she began to investigate. She snuck into the areas of the church that were usually closed off to the public. There were rooms filled with old books, handwritten notes, and unusual symbols on the walls, symbols she recognized from her dream. The shrine she had seen in her sleep, it was real. It existed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she unearthed more evidence, notes, diagrams, and hidden artifacts that told a disturbing story. This wasn't just the church. It was a front, a mask for something far darker, something rooted in ancient, forbidden practices. The tension in Ngozi's life grew unbearable. Every step she took felt like a step closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. The prophet's powerful hold on the church was undeniable. He had convinced everyone of his divinity, and now he was playing with forces no man should ever touch. Ngozi's investigation led her to old flashbacks, moments she had never noticed before. She recalled the stories she had heard when she first came to the church about the prophet's early years, about his struggles with faith. In those early days, he had been a humble man, lost and searching for answers. But as his fame grew, so did his hunger for power. Chijioke's rise to power had not been purely divine. He had made deals, he had sacrificed parts of his soul, and he had opened the door to demonic forces. The miracles were real, but they came at a price. And now, the time for a sacrifice had come again. Ngozi began to feel like a target, the dark forces watching her, sensing that she was getting too close to the truth. She was no longer just a witness to the strange happenings. She was becoming a part of the story, and the danger was no longer distant. It was closing in on her. The night was thick with tension as Ngozi quietly watched the prophet from afar. She had seen him leave the church after the service before, but this time something felt different. The sense of urgency that had been growing inside her could no longer be ignored. Her instincts screamed at her. She had to know the truth. She had to follow him. Ngozi slipped through the church's back door as quietly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. The streets were quiet, the moonlight casting long shadows across the road. She waited for a moment, then followed Chijioke from a distance, careful not to make a sound. His path was steady and determined, as if he knew exactly where he was going. They walked through the quiet streets, away from the lights of the city, deeper into the unknown. Ngozi's eyes never left the prophet's back, her footsteps silent on the pavement. The path seemed to lead them toward the outskirts of the city, far from the crowds, away from the safety of the known. Chijioke continued down the narrow road, turning into a heavily wooded area on the city's edge. The trees were thick, their branches twisting overhead, blocking out much of the moonlight. Ngozi hesitated at the edge of the forest, but compelled by a force she couldn't explain, she stepped forward, following his every move. The path grew darker as they went deeper into the woods, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the unseen presence of something sinister. It was then that she saw it, a hidden clearing bathed in an eerie glow, surrounded by twisted trees and ancient stone markings. In the middle of the clearing stood a shrine, carved with strange symbols, its surface covered in dark, soot-stained marks. The scent of incense filled the air, and the faint sound of chanting could be heard as Chijioke stepped forward. It was here, in this dark corner of the city, that the true nature of his power was revealed. Ngozi crouched behind a tree, hidden in the shadows, watching with wide eyes as Chijioke began his ritual. His voice was low, but steady, as he spoke words that sounded like ancient incantations, too deep and powerful to be understood. Around him stood a group of dark figures, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Their presence was unnerving, as if they were part of something much larger, something far darker. As the ritual continued, Chijioke raised his hands, and a figure stepped forward. A church member, someone Ngozi had seen at every service. He was a young man, full of hope, someone the prophet had healed not long ago. The man's eyes were dull, as though he had already been touched by the darkness. Ngozi's heart stopped. No, not him. Chijioke spoke softly, his words lost in the chant, as he began to prepare the ritual. The dark figures stepped forward, guiding the young man to the altar. It was then that Ngozi understood. These were not just healing rituals. These were sacrificial acts, human sacrifices made to renew the prophet's power, to keep the dark pact alive. Chijioke moved with precision, his hands steady as he performed the final steps of the ritual. The young man, standing helplessly at the altar, had no idea what was about to happen. It was clear now that the prophet's power was not divine, but demonic. His miracles weren't gifts from God. They were the result of sacrifices, of blood, of deals made with forces beyond human understanding. Ngozi watched in horror as Chijioke offered up the young man to the dark forces, his body trembling as he spoke words of binding. The air grew thick, charged with energy, as the ritual was completed. She could barely breathe. The young man was no longer standing, his body now lying still on the altar. The ritual was done, but the sense of darkness that filled the clearing was unbearable. Chijioke stepped back, a look of satisfaction on his face. His power was renewed, but at what cost? And worse, what would happen next? Who would be the next to face the same fate? Ngozi's stomach twisted as she realized the full extent of what she had just witnessed. The prophet, the man of God who had healed, who had led with such authority, was no more than a puppet of dark forces, using the faith of the people to further his agenda. The man of God you trust is not the man you think he is. Beneath the surface lies a dark pact with a powerful cult, one that has sustained him and given him powers beyond comprehension. But it isn't just power he seeks, it's control. The sacrifices are made to renew his strength, to ensure that his grip on the congregation never weakens. Chijioke's internal struggle was growing. He was caught between two worlds. The man he had once been, the man who had truly believed in his divine calling, was slipping away. He had made a deal, a dangerous one, long ago. The dark forces he had aligned himself with were always demanding more, and he could feel them closing in. Time was running out. To maintain his power, he had to keep up the rituals. He had to keep the sacrifices coming. Without them, his power would fade, and he would lose everything. The cult would turn on him, and his life, his rise, would be over. But with each sacrifice, a part of his humanity slipped further away. The man he once was, the man who had sought to heal, was becoming something else, something darker. The truth that Ngozi had uncovered weighed heavily on her heart, but no one believed her. She tried to warn the others, tried to share what she had seen, but the prophet's influence was too great. The church was overflowing with people. Those who had witnessed his miracles, felt his healing touch, and believed him to be a servant of God. They didn't see what Ngozi had seen. To them, Chijioke was still a miracle worker, a man of faith. He was beyond reproach. When she spoke of the shrine, of the sacrifices, of the cult-like atmosphere she had discovered in the forest, they dismissed her warnings as delusions. Some said she had become too caught up in her own doubts, too distracted by the pressure to be the next chosen one. Others even suggested she was jealous of the prophet's power, unable to understand that someone so close to God could have a dark side. The prophet was too powerful. His fame had spread beyond Port Harcourt. His name was now known across the country, and people traveled from miles away just for a chance to be healed by him. As the church grew larger, so did his influence. He was a spiritual leader, a healer, a man of God. What could possibly be wrong? But Ngozi's heart could not ignore what she knew. She could see it. Every time someone was healed, they came back changed, but not for the better. The young mother, who had been healed of infertility, now couldn't look anyone in the eye. The elderly man who had walked again after years of paralysis was distant, his face cold, as if something inside him had died. They were empty, their spirits somehow erased, as if their souls had been taken to fuel the prophet's power. Ngozi's fear grew as she began to notice that she was no longer just a witness to the prophet's evil. She had become the next target. The cult had marked her as the next sacrifice, the one who would renew his power. The more her faith in Chijioke faltered, the stronger his dark influence seemed to become. The man who had once spoken with love was now a puppet to forces beyond his control. The prophet had seen something in her, a potential. Ngozi was destined for greatness, or so he had once thought. Her gifts, her faith, her pure heart, these were things he could use. These were things he needed. And now, she was the perfect candidate to offer to the dark forces that controlled him. The cult demanded it. Night after night, as the church continued to swell with followers, Chijioke's power grew. His miracles became more spectacular, his words more convincing. The people who had been healed spoke of unimaginable peace, of being touched by the hand of God. But it was all a lie. Ngozi began to notice that the tension in the air was thickening. Chijioke's eyes, once filled with warmth, now looked hollow, as though something had been drained from him. He was a man torn between two worlds, the man he had once been and the dark entity that controlled him now. Every night, as he performed the rituals, his guilt grew heavier, but the need for power was stronger. The closer Ngozi got to the truth, the more dangerous it became for her. She felt it every time she walked past the prophet's room, every time his gaze lingered on her a little too long. She had seen the darkness in him, and now he saw her as the next offering to that darkness. The tension between Chijioke and Ngozi grew. He could feel the pull of the cult getting stronger. They needed her. They demanded her sacrifice. Yet part of him was still the man of God he had once been. He didn't want to hurt her. Ngozi was different. She was pure, full of light, full of faith. But the darkness was swallowing him whole, and the price for power was steep. The nights were no longer peaceful for Chijioke. Every night, as he stood before the shrine, preparing for the ritual, he could hear the voices, the whispers of the dark forces demanding more. He had always known there would be a price to pay, but he never imagined it would come to this. He had always believed in the power of miracles, but now he couldn't deny it any longer. In the deepest recesses of his mind, he knew if he refused to sacrifice Ngozi, he would lose everything: the church, his power, his purpose. The cult would turn on him. His guilt crushed him, but the fear of losing control was even more unbearable. And so, he stood at the edge, torn between his desire for redemption and the demonic influence he had let into his life. He could feel the darkness closing in, the crushing weight of the deal he had made. His moral self fought back, but the grip of the dark forces was unshakable. It was too late to turn back. The cult would not allow it. The sacrifice was required. And Ngozi, innocent, pure-hearted Ngozi, had become the price to ensure his continued reign. The day of reckoning had arrived. The air was thick with tension, and Ngozi's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing against her. It had to be revealed. It was time to confront the man who had deceived them all. The truth would no longer be silenced. The church was crowded as always, the air filled with a sense of excitement, expectation, and faith. People stood in the aisles, praying fervently, their hands raised in worship. Prophet Chijioke stood at the pulpit, delivering one of his powerful sermons, his words smooth and confident. He spoke of faith, healing, and the power of God, but underneath the words was a poison, a lie that Ngozi could no longer ignore. Chijioke's voice boomed through the church, reaching every corner as he spoke of divine miracles, of healing, of restoration. But Ngozi was done with the lies. She had seen the truth, and she could no longer sit in silence. In a moment of pure resolve, she stepped forward. The room fell silent as her footsteps echoed, each step carrying the weight of the truth she was about to expose. She made her way to the front of the church, the eyes of the congregation now following her every move. Chijioke's voice faltered for the briefest moment as he saw her approach. "Stop!" Ngozi's voice cut through the silence, loud and clear. All eyes turned to her, and the air seemed to hold its breath. The prophet's expression shifted from calm to disbelief. He tried to regain control, but there was no denying the truth any longer. Ngozi stood tall, her voice strong as she exposed the lies that had been buried beneath the surface for so long. "The prophet you trust is not who you think he is." Ngozi cried, her words ringing out through the church. "This man, this so-called man of God, has made a deal with dark forces. He has been sacrificing innocent lives to renew his power." A gasp rippled through the congregation as the weight of her words sank in. Chijioke's face turned pale, his eyes wide with panic as he tried to dismiss her accusations. "What is she saying?" he stammered, trying to regain control over the situation. "This is nonsense. She is a liar. Don't listen to her." But the crowd wasn't convinced. Ngozi's words had planted a seed of doubt, and the truth could no longer be buried. With shaking hands, Ngozi pulled out the proof, the notes, the diagrams, the symbols of the shrine that she had uncovered. The dark rituals, the sacrifices, everything was exposed. "The cult," she continued, her voice steady, "is real. The shrine exists, and the sacrifices are made in your name, Prophet Chijioke. You are not healing. You are deceiving. You are feeding off the faith of the people, taking their souls to strengthen your power." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Chijioke's frantic denials. "No, this is all lies. You don't know what you're saying." He tried to command the congregation, but his voice lacked the usual authority, trembling with fear. The dark forces inside him had felt the cracks forming, the grip slipping. His control faltered. For the first time, his confidence wavered. He could see the doubt in the eyes of the people who had once worshipped him. But before he could fully collapse under the weight of his lies, the cult intervened. Figures cloaked in dark robes rushed into the church, shadows moving swiftly as they tried to silence Ngozi and prevent the truth from spreading. They stepped forward with aggressive intent, ready to strike down the woman who dared expose their leader. The air crackled with tension, and Ngozi's heart raced, but she did not back down. She stood firm, facing the cult with the full force of her courage. "Stop them," one of the cult members shouted, trying to control the situation. But Ngozi wasn't alone. As the cult advanced, the congregation began to stir. The people who had once trusted Chijioke now turned their gaze toward the truth, to Ngozi's bravery, to the reality they could no longer deny. They began to stand up. One by one, they began to reject the lies. Ngozi led the charge, her voice growing louder as she called on the congregation to stand with her. "This is not the power of God. This is deception. This is darkness. We are not puppets to be controlled by evil forces." Her words pierced the silence like a blade, cutting through the illusion Chijioke had carefully built. One by one, people began to rise from their seats, casting off their blind faith in the prophet. They turned their backs on the cult, on the false power, and on the lies they had believed for so long. The prophet's power waned. The dark forces that had once empowered him now turned against him. Chijioke's face twisted in fear and disbelief as he realized he was losing his hold on the church. The cult's grip on him slipped, and the light of truth began to shine through the cracks in his facade. In a final, desperate attempt to hold on to his power, Chijioke reached out, his voice a whisper of desperation. "No, I can't lose it. I can't go back." But it was too late. The cult's influence dissolved, and the truth had shattered the illusion. The power that had once fueled his miracles was no longer his to command. Chijioke collapsed to his knees, his hands trembling, as the truth of his dark pact became his undoing. The congregation, those who had once worshipped him, now saw him for who he truly was. The man of God they had followed was no more. The darkness that had consumed him was now broken, and Chijioke fell from grace, his reign of deception over. In the end, it wasn't the dark forces that held the power, it was the truth that had always been there, hidden in the hearts of the people, waiting to be set free. Chijioke's fall marked the end of a reign built on lies, and the beginning of a new dawn for the church. Ngozi had broken the chains of deception, leading the church back to true faith. The people no longer followed a man who could heal with false promises. They now followed the light of truth, a truth that would forever protect them from the darkness. The fall of Prophet Chijioke was not just the end of a man, it was the end of an era. The shadows that had once loomed over the church began to recede, and in their place, a new light began to shine. It was a light that was pure, a light that could not be dimmed by the darkness of deception. Ngozi stood at the center of it all, her heart full of both sorrow and hope. The church, which had once been a place of darkness, was now beginning to heal. The people who had been deceived by the false prophet began to question their beliefs, not just about him, but about themselves. What had they truly been following? Had it been faith in the divine, or had it been faith in a man? Now, they were forced to look inward, to reflect on their own beliefs. The path to true faith was not one of blind trust in a person, but of trust in the light of God, a light that had never wavered, even in the darkest moments. Ngozi led the church back to genuine faith. She spoke to them of truth, of restoration, and of the power of the divine light that had always been there, waiting to guide them. With each word, the people began to find peace again. The miracles they had once believed were dark and false were now seen for what they truly were, deceptions that had blinded them to the true power of faith. And as they turned back to God, the church began to heal. The wounds inflicted by Chijioke's betrayal slowly started to close. The faithful who had once been broken by the prophet's lies now found themselves whole again. They rediscovered the strength of their own beliefs, the strength of their community, and the strength of the truth that had never left them. True miracles come not from darkness, but from faith in the light. This story reminds us to always look beyond the surface and trust the truth, no matter how hard it is to face. In the days that followed, the church rebuilt itself stronger than before. It was no longer a place of false hope, but a sanctuary of truth, a place where faith could flourish in its purest form. The people no longer needed to worship a man, for they now understood that true faith comes from within, from a direct connection to the divine. And so, Ngozi stood at the forefront of this new chapter, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope. She led the church in prayer, guiding them to reconnect with the light of truth that had always been there, waiting for them to embrace it. As the congregation gathered together, hands raised in prayer, there was a sense of peace in the air, a peace that had been missing for so long. The darkness that had once overshadowed their faith was now gone, replaced by the warmth of truth, the warmth of genuine love, and the warmth of true connection with God. Ngozi stood in the center, surrounded by the faithful. She led them in prayer, her voice steady, her heart filled with hope. The church was restored, and with it, the faith of those who had once been lost. The shadow of the prophet had been lifted, and in its place was the light of a new beginning. The church was no longer a place of deceit, but a place of truth, and for the first time in a long while, the people of the church felt free. Now that you've heard the truth behind Prophet Chijioke's rise and fall, we want to hear from you. Do you think people can be deceived by false prophets in real life? Can someone's charisma and miracles make us blind to the darker forces at play? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on the dangers of deception and blind faith. If this story shocked you, hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful lesson. We all need to stay vigilant and keep searching for the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to face. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Stay tuned for more dark secrets uncovered. You won't believe what we're revealing next. Our next story is sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching Timeless Epic Folktales, where the stories are as epic as they are unforgettable. Until next time.